the Israelis go ahead and hit the missile sites and the weapons facilities. If Syria had retaliated, Israel was already ready to go to a full-blown war. It already had its troops on the northern border. And we read a few days later that Russia urged Syria not to respond. And it says here, the official said Moscow advised Syria and Hezbollah not to respond, but to concentrate on the big picture. Whoops, there we go. In the news, you have to understand what Israel is trying to prevent. It's trying to prevent a continuous state from Iran over here. Here's Syria, here's Lebanon. Trying to prevent this land bridge. So in the news of the same week, about a week after that came out, there was an article talking about Kurdistan. The reason why Israel and the United States are trying to create a new state is actually prevent a continuous state from Iran to Syria. And by establishing this Kurdistan state, it would actually break the two up. That's why you'll read more and more about this in the newspaper, especially because Turkey, they believe they're going to be a major player in the last days, and they are. And so they are trying to prevent this from taking place, and obviously the Iranians don't want this to take place. Now the Middle East is really getting interesting because there's a lot of prophetic events that they believe. So you have to understand, the Muslims believe their Messiah is coming. Now, the difference between Sunnis and Shiites, Sunnis believe they are the natural, the physical descendants of Muhammad, and they believe they are the ones that should rule the caliphate. Shiites believe they're spiritual ancestors, and they believe they should rule the caliphate. What is the caliphate? Well, a caliphate is a government controlled by Islam, and they believe that the caliphate is coming to the entire world. That the whole world will be subjugated to the caliphate. But in Islam, you can only have one leader at the caliphate. So Sunnis don't only be serving Shiites, and Shiites don't only be serving Sunnis. That's why they are fighting one another, because they both believe that the caliphate is coming. Now what's interesting is, I know that you can't read that, well maybe you can. About 5 years ago, the former president, Iranian President Ahmadinejad, put out a video, and you can go on YouTube. It's translated by a guy named Reza Kahili, and the translation literally, they were expecting, ready for this, that when Abdullah died, King Abdullah died, that this would start a revolution in Yemen, and out of Yemen, the Mahdi would come and would retake Mecca and Medina. In this article, I know that you can't read it, but that's what it talks about. Well, what happened was, in Saudi Arabia, King Abdullah died. And you read the date here, it was January 23rd. Now, the day that Abdullah died, you ready for this? What was happening in Yemen was that the same day, the government of Yemen fell. So right then, that gave the Shiites, our prophetic words are coming to pass. Part of what's happening now is because part of that prophecy was because of the corruption of the Al-Saud family, part of the corruption that they're corrupting Mecca, Medina, that it needs to be purified. That's what's happening in Saudi Arabia today. Because you have a new king, and he's trying to show himself as the great reformer. And he's basically, let me go back just a little bit. Part of Shiite eschatology is this. They believe that the little Satan and the great Satan must be destroyed, because this is preventing the caliphate from being established. Now, the little Satan is Israel. Most Americans don't realize that the United States is considered the great Satan in the Middle East. The reason why we need to be acknowledged is because we're preventing Islam from taking over the entire world. And so what's taking place is now, this is interesting, they said, we can go ahead and make weapons, nuclear-grade weapons, uranium in 4 days. If you go ahead and break off the agreement, you break off this deal that Obama set up, it doesn't matter, because we can go ahead and build a bomb real quick. And then at the same time that this is happening, the Iranians threaten the United States and threaten the bases in the United States. But what's interesting is this is happening. Why? Because at the time that this is happening, we find out that Jared Kushner was doing a secret meeting inside of Saudi Arabia. See, the Saudis don't want the Iranians taken over. The Saudis are Sunnis. They also know the predictions or the prophecies of the Shiites. That's why we have a war in Yemen. And that's part of the reason why you had the Saudi king go ahead and round up a bunch of princes of corruption, because he's trying to show himself that he is true to Islam. The same time this is happening, you had the Lebanese president or Lebanese prime minister, who is both a Lebanese citizen and a Saudi citizen, resign. Everything that's happening in the Middle East is happening because they believe their Messiah is coming. But we have to understand that all these events, God is actually orchestrating the restoration of the sons of Ishmael. Did you hear me? The sons of Ishmael. Because God said the restoration of all things. Why wouldn't that include the Muslims? We have to understand that what is coming is a great and a catastrophic war. Now, I'm going to take you back just a little bit to the Lebanon War that happened in 2006. In 2006, the war began on July 12th. This is very significant because you have to understand that God has been time-stamping where we are prophetically with archaeological discoveries. If you go back to 1947, there was this little kid named Muhammad who was looking for a sheep. He throws a rock into a cave, happens to be in a place called Qumran. He hears a jar break. He goes in, he finds this jar, and he finds this ancient scroll. He then takes it to Bethlehem where he sells it. The Bethlehem dealer then calls his friend, an Israeli professor. He comes and buys the scroll that day. The day that he buys the scroll, there's a vote happening in the UN calling for the existence of the state of Israel that hadn't been a nation in 2,000 years. And he's literally reading Isaiah 11, and I will restore my people a second time, and this shall be a sign to the nations. God time-stamped where we were, that there was a second restoration of the people back to the land, and this was a sign for the nations. Now, July 12th, the war begins. And in Ireland, on July 20th, they found, now there's this, I know that it's hard to read, but they found an archaeological scroll, archaeological significance as Irish equivalent to the Dead Sea Scrolls. When did they find this scroll? We find it on July 20th, 2006, 8 days after the Lebanon War began. What's interesting is it was Psalm 83. Now, we're going to go into Psalm 83, but what I believe is that we're now approaching the time where the pause can restart up. See, there's often a pause between wars. In modern history, we had the first Gulf War take place. Now, the Gulf War was led by George Bush. It happened. And it ended on the Hebrew feast day of Purim. The irony was 12 years later, on the Hebrew feast day of Purim, George W. Bush started the second Gulf War. But really what it was the one big war to take out of Saddam Hussein. It just happened to have a pause. We are now approaching the 12-year anniversary of the first Lebanon War. So now this year is kind of very significant because there's a lot of other cycles of war that kind of converged this year. But I want to take you now to what Psalm 83 says. Because this is what they found. They said, "O God, do not keep silent, do not hold your peace, or be still, God. For behold, your enemies make an uproar, and those who hate you have raised up their heads. They lay crafty plans against your people. They consult together against your treasure ones. They say, let us come, wipe them off as being a nation." So what is found in the middle of the Lebanon War is this scroll, and it talks about this confederacy of nations whose plot is to eradicate the Jewish people. Well, Islam, Shiite or Sunni, they believe the little Satan must be eradicated. Now, what's interesting is the symbol of Islam is what? The crescent moon, right? Well, in verse 11 of Psalm 83 is this really peculiar passage, right? You read this and you say to yourself, what does this mean? Make the nobles like Oreb and Zeeb, and may all the princes like Zebah and Zalmunna, who said, let us take possession for ourselves the pastures of God. You read this and you say, what does this have to do with the Jewish people being annihilated? It doesn't seem to make any sense. But the Lord says it's the heart of a king to search out a matter. And if you actually go and search this out, you'll read in Judges 8:21, then Zebah and Zalmunna said, rise yourself and fall upon us, for as a man is, so is his strength. So Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna and took, ready, the crescent ornaments. What's the crescent ornament? The crescent moon. Hidden inside of the Psalm 83 passage, written over 1,000 years before Islam even came to existence, is a symbol of Islam. Now, what's the purpose of this war? Look what it says in the last part of Psalm 83. Fill their faces with shame that they may seek your name. The Muslims have to be proven that Allah is not true. That God is going to use Israel to go ahead and show them. Because, they call Israel the scum of the earth. And God is going to use Israel to go ahead, fill their faces with shame that they may seek your name. Then verse 18, that they may know that you alone are most high over all the earth. So this war, which would seem to be a judgment to Islam, its purpose in this quote-unquote judgment is really about restoration. Now, does this mean that Israel is spared in all of this? You see, if this war is connected to the Damascus war, and it's kind of interesting because this is what it says about Damascus. An oracle concerning Damascus, behold, Damascus will cease from being a city, it will be a heap of ruins. It talks about the destruction of Damascus, and it's still a city today. But inside of this passage, look what it says in verse 17, in verse 7 of Isaiah 17. In that day, man will look to his maker, and his eyes will look on the Holy One of Israel. That this war is going to have everyone looking to the true God of Israel. And then what does it say? He will not look to the altars or the work of his hands. He will not look on his fingers have made either Ashram or the altars of incense. And you say to yourself, okay, what is he talking about? False idols. What's interesting is when we talk about the restoration of Israel back to the land, God is not ignoring their sin. Because in Israel, the government actually pays women to go ahead and have up to 2 abortions. And the government covers all that. I mean, Tel Aviv wants to be known as the gay capital of Europe. So what's interesting is there's also a judgment coming to Israel. This is what it says in Jeremiah 16. Behold, I will send many fishers, declares the Lord, and they will catch them. And afterward I will send many hunters, and they shall hunt them from every mountain and every hill and out of the crest of the rock. So at the beginning, in 1947, when Israel became a nation, people just flooded. If you were a Jew, you just moved to the land. But now, what's happening is we're seeing the rise of anti-Semitism in places like France. The rise of anti-Semitism is really the rise of the hunters driving Israel back to its land. What's its purpose? Continue to watch and read with me. For my eyes are on all their ways. They are not hidden from me, nor is their iniquity